turning radii, which means instead of crossing here to here, it's a shorter distance, and we slow the vehicles down as they move, reducing the risk of fatality. And we can remove slip lanes as another option. And again, these can be done if we don't think it works. This was an example we did in Ethiopia, where we went out and we tested it. We did it with some chalk and paint and cones. We checked that the big bus that everyone was worried about and the trucks could still get around the corner. And while the same level of millimeters of dimension matter at the smaller scale, the big picture network matters. And being comprehensive about that, so that sometimes it's sidewalks, sometimes it's pedestrian streets or shared spaces or laneways. There's many different strategies we can use to make a comprehensive network for pedestrians. Now for cyclists, we also have to understand that it's not just the people we say like in lycra. I don't know what the term is here in Portuguese, but do you guys have the cyclists, like the post people delivering goods and they're really, really fast, or they're kind of racing cyclists? That's not who we want to design our cycle network for, right? It's this little girl and this older lady. These are the people who must feel safe on our cycle infrastructure. So again, there's an entire toolbox of things to help you look through how to design for cyclists, starting with the facility itself. Understanding that there's different kinds. Right, we have examples where we have a protected cycle track. There's a physical barrier between the cyclists and the moving cars. That one was from Bogota, this one's from New York City. This one, the buffer gives a refuge, planting and parking. Or planting like this one in Vancouver. Sometimes we raise the cycle track, so we're giving protection in a different way. It means if a car or a bus comes along, there's a curb to protect the cyclists. Like we see here in Paris, we have examples where the speeds are much slower, so cyclists can share with cars in that space, like here in the Netherlands. And what we're seeing more recently actually is a lot of cities are starting to do more contraflow cycle lanes. Now they have to be done well to make sure that they're done safely. But what they can do is drastically increase the connectivity of a network for cyclists. When you have cities with a lot of one-way systems, it can mean a lot of extra distance for cyclists to go around to get to their destination. So Madrid, Chicago, Paris is also drastically increasing their network through contraflow. And it's not only, again, the facility itself, but it's making sure that our markings are indicating where there's a conflict zone between a cyclist and a vehicle, or it's giving a space for the cyclist to get ahead of the traffic and wait so they don't get stuck behind the cars. It's giving a space in a two-stage turn that a cyclist has a clear space that they're not going to get hit by a vehicle as they want to make a turn around the block. And it seems so logical, right? But it's really hard to ask people to cycle if we forget about something as simple as giving them a safe place to park their bike. So whether that's parking en masse at a local station or somewhere, or individual corrals on the street, that's another small detail we have to consider as we're designing our streets and public spaces. And the network is similar to the pedestrians, right? It has to be safe and connected and comfortable. Because you remember her? Are you going to send her, like if you only have small little chunks of a network, you're not going to send her to bike to school, are you? If she can't get all the way around. So our goal has to be that almost every street in our city should be safe for cycling as a sustainable mode of transportation. We understand you have to start somewhere and there's phasing, but that has to be part of a larger plan. And there's many different strategies to make sure that we're getting safe and dedicated facilities. We can either use traffic calming, so reduce speeds, which means bikes can share spaces with cars. And we can also look at the network, doing things like filtered permeability. So this is an example from the Netherlands, where we see the city blocked cars in these segments and allowed the cars had to go around, yet cyclists could go everywhere. So you start to see the travel time taking 2 minutes versus 12 minutes to get from one point to another. So we as human beings start to make different decisions about how we get around, depending on how easy it is. Right? We value our time, so that's important. And very simple strategies, like in London, where you allow little cut-throughs for cyclists, creating neighbourhoods. We're seeing more recently, like mini Hollands in London, where streets are being retrofitted to create these great networks for cycling. And that really helps us get our smaller distances as we move around, whether it's dropping kids to school or off to work. I came from Ethiopia last night. I was in Addis Ababa, and we were meeting a friend of one of the people we work with, and she has 2 children, and she said, it used to take me 15 minutes to drop my kids off at school, and now it takes an hour and 45 minutes each way. Now that's crazy that our children are sitting in vehicles instead of learning or sleeping or playing, right? If that same street had a safe cycle facility, you could probably still get there in 15 minutes, or maybe a little bit longer. So again, we are impacting people's lives for generations to come through these design decisions. Transit is obviously fundamental, right? And we have many different types of transits around the world, from light rail and large buses down to our micro transit. And because it's you don't have many of them here, but because this is a global publication, thinking of things like tuk-tuks as we get around. And the key here, again, it's pretty simple, right? It's about giving a dedicated space for transit to get around. Luckily here in São Paulo, you actually have started to get some really great bus facilities and dedicated bus lanes. And these can look different, right? Whether it's a side running transit lane in Chicago or Medellin. We see examples with center running transit and center boarding, like this one in Nantes in France. And sometimes having transit malls where there's no cars at all, and it's just transit and pedestrians, like in Bogota in Colombia. And again, it's pretty straightforward. It's very logical when you think about it. How do you ask someone to get a bus or take a bus to work or school if they're stuck in the same traffic they are if they're in their car? Right? Who's going to do that? I mean, I'm a bit of a transportation street geek, so maybe I would, but only to a certain degree. If you give that space and you're suddenly getting to work in 15, 20 minutes instead of an hour in a car, well, you start to make a different decision, right? So the number of people we can move in that space, again, is much, much higher if we dedicate that space. Now, when we give light rail or when we give BRT and we get really good at moving people in dedicated spaces in this way, one of the big mistakes we see around the world is that people forget about this connection, up and down. And then again, you have very long distances between crossings. Remember we talked about crossing distance? So what we have to do is look at these distances and make sure we're creating spaces for people to cross these transit ways. So we're moving people efficiently like this, but we're not dividing neighborhoods and communities like this. And we have a lot of new technologies around transit priority signals and so forth that make sure it's not like the BRT has to stop. That's not how it works, right? They're going to get a green light, maybe stop. Green light, stop. So that can now be managed through time and space in a really effective way. And of course, as we're thinking about transit, how we integrate with cyclists and make sure that our cyclists are safe. Again, there's many different designs. This is one example from Chicago where you see the cycle lane comes behind the bus stop so people can get on safely. Now, when we're designing for motorists, the key difference here is that we want to we don't want to go above 40 kilometers an hour in an urban environment. And what we have in our codes around the world is often actually a very big impediment to where we want to go. Often we have minimum travel lane widths, right? where the code says I have to have a minimum of 4 metres for my travel lane. But we know that that entices speeding and faster movement, and it's not an efficient use of space in our cities. So in the global guide, for travel lanes, 3 metres. For transit lanes, 3.2 to 3.5. And that means we have a lot more space to fit other things in that same amount of space. And we know that narrower lanes are safer. As I mentioned, they slow speeds and they actually carry just as many vehicles in that same space in cities. And there's many different ways we can slow our vehicles down, from vertical deflection, right, like things like speed bumps and tables and raised crossings, a bit like this one from Fortaleza up in the north of Brazil, your own country, or horizontal deflection. So it's giving a pinch point, narrowing the space the cars can move through, or having a chicane that actually means the driver has to, like, it's like a little dance, deflect their way down the street a little bit. They have to pay more attention as they're moving. This was one we did in a temporary measure, actually in Bogota a couple of months ago, to show, and we could measure the speeds and show that they were lower in the after condition around a school area. And there's many others, right? Again, lane narrowing, making a street two-way, creating shared environments like we saw in Auckland, or planting trees to kind of visually narrow the street. Now, there's the one key thing at the network scale for the cars versus the other users. While pedestrians and cyclists have to be able to go everywhere, it's okay for part of the network to not allow cars as users in them. And there's many different strategies, again, that we've talked about that can help ensure that network. For freight and service providers, obviously we have different vehicle sizes. In our dense urban areas, we should not be allowing the giant trucks, right? So thinking about the network of where we allow trucks to come in our city, and the size of space on very certain corridors where the large oversized lanes exist, but certainly not on every street. And we can do small moves. We often say, we have to have a really wide turning radii for a truck. But actually we don't. We can do little things like move a stop bar back and allow for a truck to make a tighter turn by taking up the space on the other side of the street. You see, we don't want to design our streets for that 0.1% of the day to be our everyday environment. And there's many things we can do in terms of managing time and space, right? So setting up distribution areas around a city and having smaller vehicles come into urban areas, cargo bikes, smaller electric vehicles, allowing certain hours of the day for freight to come and be delivered, identify service alleys for offloading. And finally, thinking about designing for people doing business. Again, we have opportunities where businesses spill out, cafes. We love, this stuff is great, right? It makes our cities vibrant, and who doesn't love walking down I forget the name of it, around the corner from our hotel, and it's lively and busy with people sitting outside and enjoying the street. That's great stuff for our cities, right? Or out in San Miguel near the bus stop, on an insane hot day, there's people standing there selling water. You want that water, right? These people are providing a service. So we have to balance it. We don't want it to totally block the sidewalk. But the problem is if we don't consider it, it's going to happen. So as designers, looking at the local context and place, we have to make decisions around where it makes sense to allow this and encourage it even, right? Whether it's on the edge of a building, if we have very wide sidewalks, having dedicated spaces for that, or taking spaces from parking. Some of the facilities, again, a bit of a checklist in the guide for people wanting to design for this, and some very basic site and guidance of how this can work to make sure we're maintaining our clear path. And this was one, again, actually I mentioned I just came from Ethiopia last night, so this was a transformation we did. Ankita might show some other photos, or I can show you some after, but you see the vendors are blocking the sidewalk and in the street bed. And so through simple things over the weekend, we were able to go out and paint and put planters so that we could shift vendors to certain space, make sure we had safe environments for people to walk and not block, not push them onto the roadbed. So that's kind of the user section of the guidelines. Ankita's going to talk to you more about how all of this comes together in thinking about streets themselves. But as a reminder, I just want to leave you, you guys have the power, and I implore you, I encourage you, and I plead to you that in your work, every line that you draw, every time you put an AutoCAD line on AutoCAD, or every conversation that you have, that you think of that little girl on the bike, that you think of that elderly lady trying to cross the street, and that you design to put people first. Because collectively, if you're doing that here in this corner of the world, and we can get others to do it in other parts of the world, then we can change streets to change the world. Thanks very much, and I'm going to hand over to Ankita.
Boa tarde. Are you all awake, or do we need to stand up and stretch? Maybe we all stand up and stretch a little. Sky was very, very, very eloquent and nice with her presentation, but I think we need a little break. Shake a little. I'm a Bollywood dancer, so we could do some Bollywood if you want. But we'll do that after lunch. After the break. All right. Are we ready? Perfect. Thank you. Okay, we can all take our seats. So now that Sky has made it very easy, she's explained place and people. Now let's look at how do we really translate that into street design. So for that, with the guide, we came up with 6 principles and 6 strategies. And I'll quickly go over them. The first one is to ensure universal accessibility. That means from someone who is a toddler learning how to walk, 1 or 2 years old, to someone who's 85 or 90 and still is walking, the street is accessible to both those ages. And also for those who might have any visual or physical ailments. Second is designing for safe speeds. Sky mentioned that, human body can only withstand a certain amount of speed. So we want to make sure that people and vehicles can coexist in the same space. The third is we know that the space that we have in our cities are limited, so we want to make sure that we reconfigure the space, accommodating all users. Again, the place approach, making sure that we develop context-driven solutions. And of course, we want to act now. There is no time for us to wait to change our streets. And these strategies can be applied to different street typologies that exist in our cities. In the guide, we came up with 5. But every city has very unique conditions and very unique streets. We cannot always compare certain streets that exist in our city to a different city. So what we've encouraged everyone is to really look at their cities and understand what are the typologies that exist. We divided it based on certain streets where pedestrians can take priority, certain streets which act as share streets, neighborhood streets where you've got the main street and residential streets, large streets like Avenida Paulista or even Cruzeiro do Sol in Santana, and then special conditions. Every city is unique. There might be some special conditions, whether it's the waterfront, whether it's the beachside, or even historic streets. So what I will do now is quickly go over some examples. This is a neighborhood main street. The closest example that I can think of is Voluntarias de Patras in Santana. We were recently there, and this is it's similar with the neighborhood main street. You've got shops on both sides, you've got a lot of movement happening. But the example is the same, whether this is in Sao Paulo or whether in New Delhi. You have conditions where you have cars and pedestrians moving in this mixed space. The markings are missing. The sidewalks are too narrow for all the functions to take place. So can we really transform this into a different condition? And if we can, how does that happen? The first is to widen sidewalks. We want to make sure that this is not just a place for movement, but also a place for people to stay, to spend time, and that's why you have wider sidewalks. The next option is, of course, Kai mentioned about accommodating different users. How do we make sure that our neighborhood streets give access to different modes of transportation, whether it's biking through the bike lanes and bike share stations, but also, providing these little bus bulbs that can increase or rather reduce the delay in traffic, in bus movement. So you can do all these things to change the street. Then obviously Sky talked about refuge islands, how you can give people a certain space to stop while they're crossing the street. And then lastly, this is my favorite. If I'm going to get breakfast on my neighborhood street, and my favorite cafe is on the right-hand side, but the pao de queijo that I like, the multigrau, is on the other side. And now I'm hungry because it's breakfast time. So I've gotten my coffee and I'm like, oh, I want my pao de queijo. And I want to cross the street. I'm probably not going to walk all the way to the other side and cross and then walk back. I'm going to try and cross there. So you have these multiple destinations. You want to make sure that you take care of those desired lines, and adding a mid-block crossing can really help with that. It allows me to cross safely without getting hit. And on top of that, if I raise it, it makes sure that the cars actually slow down while I'm crossing the street. So that's a neighborhood transformation for a neighborhood street. A few things and you can really change the street that exists. So Sky mentioned this example. We modeled it based on New York City, and I won't go into the details for this. The other one that I wanted to talk about was also grand streets. Now these are, in our city spaces, this is something where, while these big avenues connect different neighborhoods through the city, they also divide different neighborhoods, because if I'm standing here and I want to go to the other side of the building, most likely I'm firstly scared because there are like these multiple lanes of cars that are whooshing through, and it's probably going to take me a while before I can get there. And if I have if for example my foot is broken and I'm going to take a longer time, I don't know where I'm going to wait and stop. So these conditions sometimes can actually separate neighborhoods, and we can connect them while ensuring that both the mobility function takes place, where we can move more people, but also place function can be taken care of. So how do we do that? The first idea is to understand that there is two movements that are happening on these large streets. One is the through movement, that's allowing people to connect from one place to the other through the city. And the second is the local access. We want to make sure that everyone has enough local access to go to each side of the avenue. So, when we're thinking of through movement, Sky had mentioned the efficiency diagram. We want to make sure that we give dedicated transit lanes and allow that movement to happen. And also you've got these through movement, you've got the two travel lanes for the cars. And then, in order to understand how the shared movement or the local movement works, is right here. You create a more human scale street scenario right next to the buildings where the activity is happening. Adding a two-way bike lane, in this case where you see you have a two-way bike lane in both sides, can actually increase permeability. As a biker, as a cyclist, I don't have to go all the way across to go to another direction. If I live on this side of the neighborhood, I can actually use the same bicycle track to go either way. And also you can see that this scale, and I'll come back to that, but this scale is definitely slower. We've made sure that there's some traffic calming for vehicles that want to access these local roads. So this becomes a more shared and more human scale experience, while you've got the dedicated transit and the through movement in the center. Then of course we want to talk about, I talked about like how do we make sure that pedestrians feel comfortable. So the same strategies that we could apply in a neighborhood main street or a local street can be applied here. You've added refuge islands to break down that, the crossing time and giving people the time to stop. We've added this area where you've got pedestrians taking priority. It's all flushed, so the cars actually have to slow down as they come up. The bicyclists know that this is a place where they're a guest and it's all for pedestrians. And of course, adding mid-block crossings. So a few things that can actually change this grand street into something that works for everyone. In the guide, we took this example for Buenos Aires. This is the widest street in the world. And by adding dedicated transit lane and really breaking down that through and local movement, they were able to not only reduce crashes, but also increase, reduce travel times for buses. And then, some streets are, of course, more local. Pedestrians might want to take, you might want to give pedestrians priority, and you have pedestrian priority streets. It's about changing the operation, giving the space back. So, based on people in place approach, if I ask you, what are the different street typologies that you see in your city? Can you identify them, some? Okay, maybe we need coffee for that. So we'll think about it, and when we reconvene, you guys can share your ideas on what different typologies are there. So just like how streets, we can transform our streets, they obviously meet other streets and intersections. So how do we work with intersections? Intersections generally are associated with a bunch of conflicts. It's where all movements come together, and these are the places where we have to really pay attention to the detail. So some of the intersection design strategies that we have is firstly to make sure that the intersections are compact. That increases visibility. We want to make sure that the geometries are simple. So if you have a large intersection, think of breaking that down into smaller intersections. We want to make sure that the curb radiuses are tight, you've got no slip lanes, and you really allow uniformity in intersections. Of course, they work at a network. We can take advantage of the signal timings and integrate time and space. Of course, this also gives us an opportunity to increase pedestrian space, and of course, we have to always start with the vulnerable user. So, intersection analysis. Remember my pau de queijo and cafe on the neighborhood main street? Well, that can also happen at an intersection. I'm on one side getting my coffee in the morning, and my pau de queijo favorite store is on the other side. So we have to analyze activities for pedestrians and the way people are actually using the space. So whether it's pedestrian activity, transit or cycle activity, vehicle volumes, signalization, or even geometry. So I will now start with looking at smaller intersections here, two-way streets meeting one-way streets. I'm going to try this again. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this example? There's no space for bike. What about somewhere here, like at the very intersection? Accessibilidade is missing. What else? Faixa de pedestre. Curbs are too wide. Exactly. So you've got a large turning radius which allows speed. Faixa de pedestre, there are incomplete crosswalks, the markings are not there. There are parked cars at the intersection because, and this is very common where parking is regulated or not, where sometimes you'll have someone parking at the intersection, reducing visibility not only for the cars that are turning, but also for the pedestrians who are trying to cross at this point. And yes, there were no bike lanes or bike facilities. So how do we change that? The first step is, of course, if you can tighten the corner radius, it reduces speed for the vehicles turning, but also increases visibility for the vehicles that are turning to see the pedestrians that are standing there. Then you've got the refuge island. We've talked about this. Here, curb extension, which allows the bus stop to actually, instead of the bus pulling in for to get the passengers, it actually allows that direct connection between the bus and the bus stop. This is also extra public space, so whether you want to add utilities like a bike share station or green infrastructure, that can all happen. And of course, accessibility ramps and accessibility needs to be taken care of. So that was one example. The other one is raised intersection, and I'll go quickly through these because there's some other stuff that I want to go through. So here, similar issues. And if we can make it compact and change it, you can really see how this place can start to serve other people and give pedestrians this right of way to really reclaim that space and give them that priority. So again, making sure that the intersection is compact. We've reduced the curb radii with the help of these bollards. And then again, sidewalk extension that adds as another public space, similar to the previous example. And how many of you have struggled with bike infrastructure coming out, designing for bike infrastructure at intersections? You have one. Anyone else? We can see a little nod here. Okay, for both of you then. One of the examples that we looked at in our Global Street Design Guide was to really change the slip lane and try a Dutch intersection. So how do we do that? The first thing is we don't really want slip lanes because they allow for cars to speed and they're not very safe for pedestrians to cross. So we remove the slip lane and make sure that the intersection is compact. And here again, similar to previous examples, adding refuge island sidewalk extensions take place. We've shortened the crossing distances because of the refuge island and of course widening the sidewalks and adding these extensions. But the most interesting thing here is to be able to provide that protected intersection for a cyclist. How many of you bike, whether for leisure or for commuting? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, none of you here? Okay, so as a cyclist, when I'm on my bike, I hate to stop, just like a person in the car, right? Like, you don't want to stop once you're in motion. But the difference is here, instead of just pressing my foot to accelerate, I'm actually using all this energy in my legs to bike, which means that when I'm in motion, I want to continue to stay in motion. I want to conserve energy even at intersections. So how does this work in terms of Dutch turn? Is it allows a cyclist to make turn in 2 phases such that you can actually maintain the motion with the way the signals work, and your stopping time is very limited, so you can really conserve that energy. So that means, let me explain it. As a cyclist, when this light here is green, I get a signal to cross the street with that phase. And I can actually come and wait here, either go straight or wait for this light. By the time I've made this movement, I just have to wait for a little time and I can then go to the other side. So that's called the 2-phase safe turn. Here, the other thing that's interesting is that instead of the cyclist waiting at the back, you really advance the stop line for the cyclist and they're waiting in the front, which does 2 things. One is that it increases visibility for motorists. It makes it safer for cyclists because they're more visible to the motorists, and also give them little protection with this little corner refuge island. And lastly, the turning vehicles now have increased mutual visibility. Why? Because now instead of having a cyclist on the side, I'm facing the cyclist in a perpendicular way, so I can see the cyclist better. And then, because you've been able to set back these crossings, you have a place for the car to wait while they're letting the cyclist to cross. That means that these vehicles won't interfere in the bus and the other movement and the other operation that's happening. So this does kind of serve all different users. It makes sure that cyclists have a safe way to cross the intersection. It has places for buses to move, pedestrians to cross, and of course, for cars to move more smoothly. And again, these examples for intersections can also be looked at areas where we want to increase permeability, adding protected bike lanes, and really cutting down that signal timing to ensure that there's more permeability between the transit and the street. A great place to start for intersections are these odd places that we find in our city sometimes, where you have these odd geometries that come in. These are great places for us to really create public plazas. Times Square is a huge example of something that happened using the same principles. So here again, very simple ideas. We talked about compact intersections and breaking down geometry. That's what we could do. We've basically taken these streets and aligned them in a 90-degree angle to ensure greater visibility. And that, as a plus point, you also have public spaces that can then be utilized for people to spend time. So streets can serve more function than just movement, but also a place to be. And like I said, the example from New York is a pretty popular one. Which brings us to our next part, which is the fact that New York was one of the great stories because there was a change that took place and it was measured. We could get numbers and say, yes, these changes really have an effect on our urban environment. So, you know, even in the guide, we emphasize a lot on collecting metrics and going through this process, which means that, you know, it's not just about measuring, but also this commitment to changing streets, where we can shift how we measure success from mobility and automobile safety to a more general idea of mobility for everyone, for public health, economic sustainability, quality of life, and equity. So, to change the measure of streets, we need to change the measure of success for streets. We need to change what we measure, who we measure, why we measure, how, where, and when. And it's all there in the guide if you get a chance to look at it. In fact, you can now download it. And Sky mentioned we'll have it in Portuguese hopefully by early next year. And I won't get into everything because I know everyone's really tired. This is after lunch. So just to talk about two things today, which is what to measure and who to measure. For what, we know that the changes that we make are in the physical environment. As designers, we can really go and maybe change length of the sidewalks that we add, or the width of the sidewalks. Maybe we can change a signal timing. Maybe we're adding more trees. So these are all physical and operational changes that we make and that are tangible and measurable, which then can result in change of use and activity, which means that, say, for example, we added dedicated bus lanes and dedicated bike lanes, which meant now more people have started to use bus because it's faster to get to places, or some people have converted into taking cycling as commuting. That's increased the number of cyclists. That means that our physical changes have then resulted in change in use and activity, and we want to measure that. And collectively, all these changes that we are making have a bigger impact in our cities. With planting more trees and, you know, prioritizing sustainable mobility, maybe we've improved the air quality. Sky mentioned Delhi. Yes, my heart goes to my parents who are still living there. And it's hard, right? So whatever we're doing in this physical change, in this physical and operational space that's changing use and activity, is also having a much larger impact within our cities. So this is what we want to measure. And with who we measure is, mostly we've been doing this. We've been measuring vehicle counts, level of service, average speeds, etc. That's a very common measure that we do. So when we started working in some of our cities, we realized that some of the measures that we were looking for were not there. We never had the measure of how many people were actually using that street or crossing that street in a way that we thought they shouldn't be crossing. We didn't have a measure sometimes of how many people were using bike share to commute for their daily work, or how many people were using bike share for their leisure, or how many people were actually walking to a place or taking the bus. So these measures in a lot of cities, and São Paulo is great with a lot of data, but I'm also referring to the other cities that we work in where we haven't found that measure. So it's really important to remind ourselves that we want to measure all users. We want to shift from measuring one user to ensuring that our measures are inclusive, quantitative, qualitative, and contextual. And there's a bunch of things that we can measure, and not all projects will we have time to go and measure every little thing. But the idea is to start somewhere and start looking at the things that we want for the story we want to tell. Okay, I think this is stuck, so let's see. Oh, okay. Great. Hannah, sorry. Well, I'm just going to continue a little bit. I'm not as good as Sky, and I can't do impromptu, so I will try my best. But the idea with measuring the street was, like, we came up with these evaluation forms, which would then make it consistent for anyone to go on site and measure. I know SP Urbanismo is here, and you guys have been doing some really interesting work with those forms and collecting that data. And okay, we'll wait. So the idea of measuring different users and ensuring that we can tell the story that we want to tell. We'll always have limited resources, and we want to make sure that we use them wisely. I'm going to just wait for Hannah to try. And does anyone have any questions meanwhile that we can answer? Yeah? me or Sky?
Okay, for you and Sky, and you see who wants to answer it. I always have a doubt. How do we start to look at a problem? Like, if there was step by step, what would be this step by step? Like, what do we look first, and then how do we continue this process, like, to make the change?
Sky, do you want to take a try to answer that?
In a way, where Ankita is at the moment, talking about metrics, I think, is one of the key places to start. Because as we famously say, or Mike Bloomberg famously says in New York, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So it's very difficult to change the conversation or talk about a new type of design or testing something new in a city if we don't have the numbers to look at it. So traditionally we've only been counting cars. So exactly what Ankita's saying right now is if we start to come back with quantitative and qualitative information about a change, then that will hopefully allow us to have a fairer conversation. You know, we see that none of these changes are actually easy. They're always very, very hard. And people will always fight back. The media will always get upset and people will always complain about a lot of things. But having these numbers is one of the key things, right? Because if let's say you take a travel lane away or some parking away, 10 taxi drivers might say, I hate this is the worst design ever, and now I can't get from A to B. But actually, if we've also asked 300 other people and 87% of those people say, yes, we much prefer this design because of X, Y, and Z, it allows us to have a fair conversation. And I think for decades, we haven't been doing that. So for me, I would say that's one of the first places to start. And in order to get some initial first before and after metrics, using interim strategies is a great way to trial things. And I think Ankita is going to talk a bit more about that in these next few slides. We can continue afterwards as well.
That's actually a perfect segue into...
Have you seen this slide?
Okay, great. So that's actually a perfect segue into the fact that when you said where do we start, and Sky mentioned measuring. So with the help of these data and evaluation forms, I'm getting a signal from Fabienne. She's like, talk slowly. So I'm going to try. So for measuring and evaluating streets, you know, not only can we really benchmark what's there, we did this in São Miguel last year, and, you know, really went and saw how many pedestrians were actually walking. So we were on the site counting, and I know CET does a lot of that, so you guys probably already know most of this. But also to the fact of before and after, how did things change when you try to do something differently? So here you can see from Addis Ababa's example that Sky had mentioned, you know, we had the data from before. What was the average speed at night while turning, because that's when the highest crashes were, and a lot of those crashes were during the turn. So really to see if we were able to reduce those speeds to make this safer for pedestrians and motorists. And then the idea of building support through that through the change, and not just doing it quantitatively, but also doing it qualitatively, where here in Bogota, it was not just about the numbers, but also about how people felt about their space differently, what they wanted to see in their space, so that community participation can also be shown through the idea of measuring this change and measuring their opinions and their perceptions on the change that's taken place. So, to your question, how do we push for these arguments? And we know every time we try and change something, there are always these arguments. One of the most common ones is, well, you're reducing capacity if you're taking a travel lane away to add a sidewalk. And now we have the answer, right? We know the fact that design can make for more efficient street. We can actually move more people through the same amount of space if we give it to the right modes. The fact that this will create congestion, I want to talk about the traffic evaporation and the induced demand theory. Who all are familiar with induced demand? Well, actually, Sky did mention it with her little belt diagram. The more you give, the more lanes you add, you're increasing the demand, because more people will now think that it's easy for them to drive to places. But the reverse is also true. So imagine we've got 4 friends. Patricia, Hannah, Deborah, and myself. We four love to drive and we go everywhere. And now the streets that were there were 4 lanes, are now just reduced to 12. So now we're all angry because now it takes us like 1 hour to get to the same place that took 20 minutes. So Deborah says, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to just not go there. I can do this trip close to my house. I'm going to get my shopping done closer to where I can walk. Patricia says, well, you know what, I can take a different route now. So I'm not going to use this route. I'm going to try and do a different route, and maybe that'll work for her. Hannah decides to start biking, which she does. So she says, you know what, I'm not going to drive at all. I'm just going to bike. And for me, well, I say, well, I'm new to the city. Maybe I'll just try my hand at transportation. So we 4 have changed our habits. Maybe some days we still end up driving, but what the overall effect of this is that we've reduced the number of cars in the same space. So this idea of traffic evaporation and this theory has been proved in multiple cities, and there are a bunch of studies that actually show that if you give or take space, you can actually change user behavior, because design influences the way we behave. And similarly, like we've seen, if you build more bike lanes, more cyclists come in. So maybe we can induce demand for cyclists and pedestrians and transit instead of vehicle use, because this is the time where a lot of our cities, especially Sao Paulo, is at that tipping point where we can make that switch. The mode share right now looks perfect on paper with 30% buses, 30% transit, 30% pedestrians, and then 30% motorists. Maybe this is the time that we make that switch and make our cities work differently. Lastly, the argument that there's not enough budget, and we're huge proponents of that. Of course, taking inspiration from Jeanette Sade Khan during her term. The bike lanes in the plazas that were implemented when Jeanette was in office was only 1% of the total capital investment that went in. So it's not about money, but it's about how we use those resources. The fact that streets can change, and interim interventions are a great way to change them. And I wanted to share like a few examples, not only like we've seen these examples from New York and Buenos Aires and all these other cities that are doing it, but also from cities here and the cities we've been working in. We've of course used the very basic materials, the simple recipe that we have of paint, planters, bollards, and people, bringing them together and really allowing these changes to test and trial solutions that can help us measure the change, show what's possible so that we can build support, and also interim measures for immediate actions. So Sao Paulo, this Deborah was there with us on site. She was helping us paint. So if anyone wants any more inside knowledge, please I'm volunteering you to answer their questions. She was there with us in the morning, 5 a.m., changing the streetscape. But the idea here was very simple, right? We wanted to go make this change and measure what it meant in terms of the resources we used, the time we spent, and what that ended up as. And a great example to say that changing streets is not a matter of time or money, but a matter of will, and some very dedicated people who are here with us. And then also measure how did people feel on the sidewalks before, or how did people feel on sidewalks after, or crosswalks. And you can see the shift from 57 to 48, that switch of the pyramid where people suddenly start to feel that yes, they are safe in crossing these streets. And of course this picture where you've converted a place for children to play and be. And then of course the understanding that how did that impact or not impact our vehicular traffic, how the throughput was managed to be the same or a little higher perhaps, and the average speeds had changed but the flow still worked. Sky showed the example of Bogota. Sometimes it's just about showing what's possible, like I mentioned. And in this area, this was near a school, it was for a couple of hours where the community could see how different their streets could be. So that action could happen much quickly with just these temporary materials. 2 months back in Sao Paulo, Santana, we saw this change happen, and a lot of this went in with, of course, Thelma's here. We were there with her the few weeks before, changing the geometry and trying it out with the engineers and understanding what it really meant. but the fact that the community could see what their streets could do. And of course, the fact that, sometimes we don't have the money to build it all the way. So these interim solutions really work. This is Addis Ababa. While they're collecting and figuring out, procuring the investment, figuring out how they'll get the money and how they'll build it or what the details are, they've gone ahead and made these changes. And of course, Fortaleza Sky, I think, mentioned that too recently, closer home to Sao Paulo. And again, like every good project, we want to make sure we have some numbers that we can measure before and after. What's the perception? What's the increase in participation? And of course, most importantly, all these things are about people. So the biggest and the best argument that we all have is that we want to design streets that can put people first. And with that, our hope is that with the Global Street Design Guide and this training, we can really provide the tools to reinvent, reimagine, and redesign safer and more equitable streets that prioritize sustainable transportation. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions or any other discussions that you want to do, we're all available for you. Thank you.
Tá aqui, na verdade. O último. Ela não está tão pesada, então acho que não teremos problemas. Hopefully. Bom, pessoal, boa tarde. Podem tirar os fones. Então, eu sou a Marta, da WRI Brasil. WRI é um dos parceiros da iniciativa, como a Sky apresentou no início, desse eixo de mobilidade seguras e vias seguras. Eu queria perguntar para vocês quem veio pela primeira vez numa oficina da iniciativa desde 2015. Quem está aqui pela primeira vez? Legal. Então, bom, em primeiro lugar, eu sou coordenadora de segurança viária do WRI Brasil. O WRI Brasil é uma instituição que se dedica a transformar grandes ideias em ação no nexo de meio ambiente, desenvolvimento e bem-estar humano. O WRI tem alguns programas. Aqui no Brasil nós temos o programa de clima, florestas, todos eles voltados para a sustentabilidade. Nós também temos o programa de cidades sustentáveis. O programa de cidades do WRI está presente nesses países. Então, no Brasil, México, Turquia, Índia, China, e nós temos um centro administrativo nos Estados Unidos. E o propósito do WRI Brasil é ajudar, então, a geração futura e as futuras gerações a viverem de maneira a preservar o meio ambiente e prosperar. O nosso foco está em ajudar a solucionar os principais problemas das cidades hoje, que aí no eixo de mobilidade, então, nós temos a parte de congestionamento, expansão urbana e ineficiência. E por ineficiência, a gente fala em ineficiência energética e também ineficiência do uso do espaço público, que é um bem tão precioso para todos nós, como a Sky estava falando. No Brasil, então, o que a gente tem? A Sky mostrou... aqui está. Sorry, eu não sei quem mostrou, mas os dados da divisão modal de São Paulo, então mais ou menos 30%. E o que a gente vê é que nas capitais do Brasil, os deslocamentos são principalmente por modos de transporte ativo e por modos de transporte coletivo. E o que acontece na maioria dessas cidades é que a maioria do espaço e a maioria dos investimentos são para o espaço, para o automóvel, são focados na circulação do automóvel. E a gente sabe que, além dos acidentes, isso traz também impactos na qualidade do ar, impactos na saúde. Aqui, por exemplo, tem alguns exemplos de lugares e como os modos de deslocamento se relacionam com fatores de saúde, como, por exemplo, a obesidade. Quer dizer, quanto menos ativo o deslocamento diário, maiores as taxas de obesidade. Então, o que nós sabemos é que, bom, então as nossas vias elas têm que ser desenhadas e têm que ser distribuídas de maneira a dar prioridade para pedestres e ciclistas. E o que isso significa? Significa uma rede conectada para esses usuários, uma infraestrutura segura e adequada, tanto para pedestres quanto para ciclistas, e também a parte do acesso à estações de transporte coletivo. E aí as minhas amigas, colegas, pediram para que eu apresentasse um pouco as boas práticas da América Latina, quer dizer, pegando um pouco todos esses conceitos que elas apresentaram e o que a gente tem visto na América Latina. E, bom, antes de falar das boas práticas, eu preciso falar das práticas correntes, que não necessariamente são boas, né? O que a gente vê é que ainda tem muito espaço e tem muita oportunidade de melhoria. Esse exemplo, quer dizer, acesso ao transporte coletivo, nós ainda pecamos muito nas cidades. Esse aqui é um exemplo de Curitiba. Curitiba é um modelo de BRT para o mundo inteiro. E o que acontece é exatamente o que elas estavam falando, quer dizer, tem a estação e como é que a pessoa chega nessa estação? Quer dizer, é bem difícil. Então, é isso que a gente tem visto. O WRI trabalhou com projetos de corredores de ônibus, corredores de BRT em várias cidades do Brasil já nos últimos 10 anos. O que a gente vê é que tem uma preocupação muito grande com a operação do sistema, com o ônibus, com os terminais, com as estações, e muito pouca preocupação em como as pessoas chegam e saem, como os passageiros acessam esse sistema. Tem diversos projetos que nós olhamos que não tinha nada do desenho além da calha do ônibus e além da localização das paradas. Não tinha um acesso, não tinha nada disso. Então, esse é um exemplo. Aqui um outro exemplo que a gente quase acertou. Quer dizer, esse é um exemplo do Rio de Janeiro. O que acontece? A travessia ela foi deslocada para dar espaço de acumulação de veículos. E eu confesso que engenheiros de tráfego são extremamente eficientes em dar espaço de acumulação de veículos em interseções. Quer dizer, isso está sempre bem resolvido. A questão é, acomoda o pedestre e a travessia do pedestre aonde dá. O que acontece? Ninguém quer fazer esse desvio mostrado pela linha verde. A pessoa vai tentar sempre ir pela rota mais fácil, ir pelo caminho mais curto, e a grama mostra isso muito claramente. Quer dizer, quem começa a travessia lá, vai, dentro do possível, fazer a travessia em linha reta. É natural do ser humano fazer isso. Então, quer dizer, mesmo quando a infraestrutura está lá, muitas vezes ela não atende a linha de desejo do pedestre. Muitas vezes ela sequer está, e quando ela está, às vezes ela ainda deixa a desejar. E aí a gente vai para o extremo, começa a ir para os casos extremos de lugares em que o pedestre não pode atravessar. Eu não sei se vocês já viram essa placa em algum lugar. É uma placa de um pedestre proibido circular, proibido ter pedestres, proibido atravessar. Essa foto, então, existe. Eu achei que não existia, mas existe. Essa foto eu tirei em Bogotá. 2 semanas depois eu cruzei com a mesma placa numa cidade aqui no Brasil, na porta de um hospital. Então, tinha a placa, dizia área de alto risco de acidentes e atropelamentos, e tinha um gradil impedindo a travessia. E aí a gente começa a se perguntar, é isso que a gente quer na porta de um hospital? É não deixar a pessoa atravessar, ela tinha que fazer um desvio para usar outras travessias para conseguir chegar no hospital, que é um hospital materno-infantil. E assim, a gente realmente não consegue colocar uma travessia na porta de um hospital. São essas as cidades que a gente quer para a gente mesmo, para os nossos filhos e para as futuras gerações, até que a gente chega no caso extremo, que não é tão comum aqui em São Paulo, que são as passarelas, né? Quer dizer, joga o pedestre para cima, tira ele da frente dos carros e para dar fluidez. A passarela ela sempre está naquele lugar para facilitar o fluxo dos veículos. Ele nunca está naquele lugar para atender uma demanda dos pedestres, em primeiro lugar. É sempre um acréscimo de tempo e um acréscimo de esforço para quem vai ter que caminhar, subir, atravessar e caminhar de novo. Esse exemplo é um exemplo na Cidade do México, isso é o centro da Cidade do México, na porta de um hospital. E a gente vê quem é que está atravessando embaixo da passarela. são os funcionários do hospital, os médicos, as enfermeiras. São pessoas que têm todo o conhecimento, que não duvido que no seu dia a dia atendam acidentados de trânsito, e nem eles não vão usar, porque é o dia a dia da pessoa, ela vai tentar, vai olhar, dar uma esperadinha, tem uma brecha, vai. É isso que o ser humano faz. E esse é um outro exemplo de uma outra avenida também na Cidade do México. E aqui ainda tem uma melhoria. Além da gente ter a passarela, tem um semáforo. Então, quer dizer, já tem um semáforo, os carros já estão parando e ainda assim não colocaram uma travessia em nível para as pessoas poderem atravessar. Porque, por algum motivo, tem tantos movimentos de veículos ali que um semáforo fecha para um e abre para outro e não deu para acomodar o pedestre naquele lugar. Aqui a gente pode olhar um outro exemplo. Esse é um acesso de uma estação de BRT de Belo Horizonte, feito agora para Copa do Mundo. Então, isso aqui é uma das avenidas de entrada na cidade, quer dizer, são várias faixas de tráfego, de acesso ao aeroporto. E o que acontece? Bom, é isso que nós temos. Lá, o BRT são 2 estações, porque eles têm serviços municipais e serviços metropolitanos, são 2 módulos diferentes de estação. Então, a gente tem uma estação aqui, a outra estação lá, e o acesso pelas passarelas. Só que aí eles se deram conta, vocês estão vendo o tamanho das casas aqui, que a distância entre uma e outra passarela está muito grande. Então, o que eles fizeram? Colocaram uma travessia de pedestres ali no meio, o que é super razoável, porque estava muito distante, os pontos de travessia estavam muito distantes. Bom, então, o cidadão que está ali no meio pensou, vou pegar o BRT ou vou atravessar do outro lado e vou usar essa travessia bonita, novinha que está aqui. Só que o que acontece? Se ele entrar nessa travessia, ele não consegue acessar a estação. Porque é isso que eles fizeram. Quer dizer, tem um módulo de estação aqui, tem uma estação aqui, uma estação lá. E a travessia, ela realmente é só para atravessar de um lado para o outro da rua. Por quê? A estação só tem entrada de um lado. E o lado é virado da passarela. Então, aqui, ó. Aqui eles fecharam e a entrada é por aqui que conecta com a passarela. E aqui é a mesma coisa, esse lado aqui está fechado. Quer dizer, quase acertaram. Faltou só um pouquinho. Então, o que acontece? A pessoa, ela está aqui, ela está com uma faixa de pedestre na frente dela e ela tem que fazer todo um desvio. Vocês estão vendo o que ela vai ter que caminhar aqui para subir na passarela, para voltar e entrar na estação. Gente, isso, quem faz isso? Todo mundo tenta não fazer, né? O que acontece? Eles estão tendo um monte de problema porque as pessoas começam a atravessar na faixa, se viram para a estação, tentam entrar na estação, o tiozinho ali, coitado, cheio de sacola, ia ele caminhar 500 metros para subir na passarela, para cruzar. Então, é isso que acontece. Aí, olha a cara dele, gente. Aí ele foi lá, falou com o guarda disse, não é nem aqui que você anda, você tem que caminhar ainda mais um pouco. Ele caminhou os 2 módulos da estação na faixa do ônibus. Eles estão tendo muito problema com isso lá, por causa disso. Só que o que acontece? Não quiseram abrir a porta porque tinha que botar outra linha de catraca. E aí ia sair muito caro. Então, não quiseram abrir a porta para o outro lado. E isso, um corredor de BRT recém-inaugurado, 2014, gente. E não é assim, não é uma exceção. Isso a gente tem visto repetidamente, não é exclusivo de BH. Outro exemplo, a gente estava conversando, infraestrutura para a bicicleta precisa também ter estacionamento para a bicicleta. A pessoa tem que saber onde deixar. E então, o brasileiro, vocês sabem, somos todos criativos. A gente vai dar um jeito, mas por que não acomodar esse jeitinho no projeto? Tinha espaço ali para colocar um bicicletário. E a gente pode olhar também para outras questões, quer dizer, além da infraestrutura de pedestre, além da infraestrutura de ciclista, tem a questão dos fatores de risco, das velocidades em vias urbanas, que a gente sabe que São Paulo é uma cidade que despontou nessa questão com a redução das velocidades em todas as vias arteriais, mas isso não é regra no país, muito antes pelo contrário. Esse aqui é um exemplo, a orla de Copacabana e a orla de Ipanema, no Rio. São as 2 praias mundialmente famosas do Rio de Janeiro. O limite de velocidade lá é 70 km por hora. Então, ali está a praia, tem a ciclovia e as pessoas atravessando com limite de velocidade de 70 km por hora. E qual é o resultado? Bom, são duas das avenidas com maiores índices de atropelamento fatal do Rio de Janeiro. É óbvio. E o que acontece? As pessoas estão indo lá, atravessando a rua, para ir para a praia, para correr, para andar de bicicleta, um monte de turista. E as pessoas estão aí num ambiente de 70 km por hora. Mas, bom, isso tudo pode ser melhorado e isso tudo pode ser diferente. A gente pode ter um desenho urbano e um desenho viário que permitam os deslocamentos com segurança, que tragam velocidades mais seguras, que forneçam uma rede conectada para pedestres e ciclistas. E aí a gente pode olhar para alguns exemplos, né, de medidas de moderação de tráfego que são adotadas no Brasil. Aqui, a parte de gerenciamento de pontos de conflito, como fazer com que as travessias sejam mais seguras. Isso quer dizer, a gente sabe como fazer, isso existe. O caso de Fortaleza, que a gente estava falando antes, as travessias elevadas, eles estão implementando bastante em vários lugares da cidade. As extensões de meio-fio, esse caso aqui é Joinville, em Santa Catarina, tem muito no centro da cidade essas extensões de meio-fio para diminuir a distância de travessia, porque a gente sabe, é provado, quanto maior a distância de travessia, maior o risco de atropelamento. Tem estudos e tem números que mostram isso. E aí a gente pode olhar para o acesso ao transporte coletivo. Esse caso aqui, acesso à Estação Berrini, aqui em São Paulo. Quem de vocês conhece essa área? Alguém conhece? Acesso à Estação Berrini, a Rua Joel Carlos Borges. A gente fez uma contagem, horário de pico da manhã, das 7h30 às 8h30. Tinham 1.815 pessoas passando naquele lugar e 82 veículos motorizados. Quer dizer, a gente fez uma conta de 20 pedestres por veículo. E o espaço que tinha era faixa de tráfego, um pedaço de calçada que não tem 2 metros e cheia de obstáculos, com muito poste. O que foi feito? A gente fez já há alguns anos, foi feito um concurso de acesso a estações, foi essa estação Berrini, Vila Olímpia, e a terceira eu não vou lembrar, mas depois... Santo Amaro, obrigada, Diogo. E então teve um concurso, os escritórios de arquitetura eles submeteram uma proposta e o que aconteceu foi recém-implementada agora em setembro, na Semana da Mobilidade, um aumento do espaço para pedestre com pintura, com materiais de baixo custo. Isso foi implementado em uma semana e dá uma condição muito melhor para as pessoas que estão naquele local. Aqui o outro caso também de Belo Horizonte, eles fizeram uma coisa errada, mas eles também fizeram uma coisa muito boa. Isso aqui é o centro de Belo Horizonte. O que eles fizeram, tem o miolo do centro, onde chegam 2 corredores de BRT, eles dedicaram para o transporte coletivo, pedestres e ciclistas. Então, tem as estações de acesso, eles aumentaram a calçada, colocaram ciclovia dos 2 lados, e deixaram aí exclusivo para o ônibus com ultrapassagem nas estações. E também BH fez o programa Centro Vivo. O Centro Vivo ele é um programa implementado já há alguns anos, que tinha como objetivo transformar o centro de BH em um lugar bom para morar, trabalhar, passear e conviver. Era um projeto de requalificação do centro, que ele teve uma série de ações, ele teve investimentos em segurança pública com as câmeras, ele teve requalificação de praças e espaços públicos, e o que eles fizeram, eles aproveitaram essa oportunidade para melhorar muito as condições de circulação de pedestres e ciclistas. Essas foram algumas das medidas que eles implementaram. Tem ruas que são quadras inteiras com essas chicanas, em que sequer tem placa de limite de velocidade ali, porque a gente sabe que não tem como ir mais rápido do que 20 ou 30 km por hora nesses locais. São locais em que o pedestre foi priorizado. E aqui é que eu chamo a atenção de vocês para essa questão, quer dizer, não era um programa de segurança viária. Ele não tinha como objetivo único e específico reduzir mortes no trânsito, mas eles olharam para aquele projeto de requalificação e eles viram ali uma oportunidade de acrescentar mais um elemento que ia fazer toda a diferença. Aqui um outro exemplo, na Cidade do México, o programa Passos Seguros, esse sim teve por objetivo reduzir mortes no trânsito, principalmente mortes por atropelamento. O que eles fizeram? Eles fizeram, em primeiro lugar, uma análise espacial dos acidentes. Onde esses acidentes estão acontecendo, quais são os corredores mais perigosos da cidade. Aí eles priorizaram interseções. O Passos Seguros ele é um programa de tratamento e requalificação de interseções. Os critérios usados para priorização foi a proximidade dos locais, porque eles viram que, mesmo nesses corredores, tinham clusters de ocorrência de acidentes, número de atropelamentos, frequência e total de mortos e feridos. Então, na fase 1, esse primeiro mapeamento, eles identificaram 6 corredores críticos e se propuseram a tratar 54 interseções. As medidas que eles adotaram foram desenho, melhoria do desenho, mais espaço de pedestre, sinalização horizontal e vertical, sinalização semafórica também. Esse é um outro exemplo de o tipo de intervenção que foi feita. Hoje, quer dizer, começou em 2014. Hoje já tem 171 interseções tratadas. Isso levou a uma redução de 50% nos acidentes, 18% de mortes no trânsito. E a meta deles é atingir 200 interseções e eles estavam tentando a meta ainda para esse ano. Então, é o mesmo tipo de intervenção que a gente estava vendo em Buenos Aires, são intervenções de baixo custo e de alto impacto. E aí a gente pode olhar para o caso de Santiago, no Chile, que fez recentemente um plano de requalificação no centro também, que teve como principal objetivo melhorar a infraestrutura de pedestres, ciclistas e transporte coletivo. O que eles fizeram? Mapearam os principais eixos de circulação do centro, fasearam, então colocaram uma proposta de etapas, tratando algumas ruas primeiro, e as medidas são aumento de calçadas, novas ciclovias e dedicar algumas ruas para a circulação exclusiva do transporte público no horário de 7 horas da manhã até as 9 horas da noite, que é o horário em que as pessoas precisam chegar e circular no centro. O que aconteceu? Algumas dessas ruas não tinham... Esse era o cenário. Elas tinham 2 faixas de tráfego, uma faixa em que circulava o ônibus e quase nada de calçada. E aí eles resolveram ser bastante audaciosos na medida e, bom, o nosso objetivo é aumentar espaço de pedestres, então é isso que a gente vai fazer. Eles tiraram as faixas de circulação de tráfego e deixaram a faixa de circulação do transporte público. O que aconteceu em 3 avenidas, em que eles mediram os resultados de antes e depois, teve uma redução no tempo de viagem de transporte público de 42% a 95%. Então, isso foi bastante... Eles estão ampliando esse programa já. E aí a gente pode olhar para a questão da infraestrutura cicloviária também, quer dizer, tem a parte do estacionamento, que eu estava falando antes, e tem a parte de compartilhar a ciclovia ou ciclofaixa com a calçada, que a gente sabe que muitas vezes é uma medida tomada em função de restrição do espaço, só que muitas vezes ela não funciona, porque nesse caso mesmo era um ponto de estrangulamento em que o espaço do ciclista está demarcado por 2 linhas e que sequer tem espaço para o pedestre circular. Então, dá para fazer muito melhor. Esse gráfico que a Sky tinha mostrado, quer dizer, esses são dados de Copenhague, mostrando que quanto maior é o uso da bicicleta, menos é o risco para os ciclistas. E aí é que está, não é só em Copenhague, em Bogotá está vendo uma evolução muito similar. Quer dizer, a linha azul a gente tem o uso da bicicleta e em vermelho tem o número de ciclistas feridos. A gente está vendo essa mesma tendência, aumenta o uso e diminui o risco. O que Bogotá fez? Adicionou 100 quilômetros de ciclovia. Com isso, as mortes de ciclistas caíram 47% entre 2003 e 2013 e o uso da bicicleta foi de 3% para 6% das viagens diárias. E aí a gente pode olhar também para a combinação entre pedestres, ciclistas e o transporte coletivo. Esse exemplo é de Fortaleza, o que eles fizeram um desvio na ciclovia, garantindo o espaço do pedestre para que a circulação nessa região ficasse ordenada. Então, o que a gente vê? Tem América Latina em geral, a gente ainda tem muito para melhorar, mas tem muitas iniciativas bacanas que estão sendo feitas e que são boas inspirações. O que fica assim como desafios, a gente precisa priorizar o que merece ser priorizado. Quer dizer, é olhar bem para quem se quer dar prioridade naquele local e adotar medidas que correspondam a isso e não quase acertar e não ficar faltando só um pedacinho, só abrir uma porta da estação para a pessoa conseguir entrar do lado certo. Um outro desafio é a gente migrar de medidas isoladas, que muitas vezes acontecem, para planos e programas de ação mais estruturados e que possam dar escala para aquelas ações na cidade. Isso leva a resultados mais efetivos. Tem também a questão das oportunidades, que foi o que BH fez com o caso do centro. Quer dizer, não era um programa de segurança, tem várias cidades que têm programas e verba para requalificação e algumas verbas também relacionadas a turismo, requalificação de espaços públicos em áreas turísticas, e isso também pode ser um bom gancho para adotar esse tipo de medida. E aí, como uma escala mesmo de todas essas ações, está a mudança de paradigma ao adotar estratégias de sistema seguro e de visão zero que buscam realmente acabar com as mortes no trânsito e dar uma melhor infraestrutura e fazer com que o sistema viário seja seguro para todos os usuários. Essas políticas de visão zero, elas começaram na Suécia, agora estão sendo adotadas. Recentemente foi lançado o plano de Bogotá. O México também está trabalhando com isso, então isso dá uma escala e dá uma força para as ações que é bastante importante. Só para finalizar, alguma parte desse conteúdo está nas publicações do nosso site. Tem uma publicação que chama Acessos Seguros, que é específico para acesso a estações de transporte coletivo. Tem a outra publicação, que é o Desenho de Cidades Seguras, traz uma série de medidas aplicadas em várias cidades do mundo, principalmente em países em desenvolvimento. Todas estão, e várias outras, para download no nosso site. E é isso. Obrigada.
Obrigada, Marta. Agora a gente tem uns 10 minutos de perguntas e respostas antes do intervalo para um café. Então eu queria convidar Sky, a Ankita e a Marta para ficar aqui na frente para passar a voz um pouco. Uns 10 minutinhos, umas... A gente poderia até, inclusive, fazer algumas rodadas. Alguém tem alguma questão? Enquanto a gente faz essa rodada de perguntas e respostas, eu vou passar também um formulário de avaliação super curtinho para a gente entender melhor o que vocês acharam da oficina de hoje.
Boa tarde. Eu trabalho na CT, agora estou com um estudo mais específico no grupo de segurança, e a gente está tentando estabelecer uma estratégia para reduzir o número de mortes, né? E, assim, nos levantamentos que a gente tem, os fatores contribuintes, a maior parte deles, dos acidentes que envolvem mortes, é o fator humano. Como é que vocês trabalham isso lá? Qual é a estratégia que vocês usam de soluções para a segurança viária quando a maior parte desses acidentes envolve prudência do fator humano? Queria saber como é que vocês trabalham isso lá, a experiência de vocês lá.
That's an awesome question. And we know that humans, from the day we began till the day we are not here on this planet anymore, will continue to make mistakes. A lot of people like to think they're perfect. We know none of us are. So I think going with the basis that there will always be mistakes, and looking at what we can do as people who design the built environment to make sure we reduce the impact and the effect of any kind of crashes or collisions. So a lot of the strategies we've been talking about in terms of changing the physical street to lower speeds is fundamental. And then the other thing that's really key for us to do is to observe the behaviour of pedestrians, where people want to go. And I know Marta showed one of the slides of what we call like goats trails or desire lines. And so we have to be really smart about going out and observing and looking and watching and measuring distances, so that when we see those types of behaviours happening, we could do two things, right? One, we can say, oh, they are misbehaving. Those pedestrians are not behaving as the built environment is telling them to. They are in the wrong, right? But we don't want to do that. What we have to be doing, because that's not going to get us anywhere, what we have to do is look and see, all right, people obviously want to get from there to there. There's a desire line. So that is our responsibility to allow for that movement in a safe way. That means we have to stop the vehicles, slow the vehicles down, put in safe crossings that allow people to get there, make sure they're the right distances, refuge islands, all the stuff we just talked about. So we accept that mistakes are going to happen. We reduce the impact of any of those collisions. And then we take responsibility to be proactive in going out to retrofit our streets to make sure that they work for our most vulnerable users, right? Remembering we don't have all that armor, that protective armor. So it has to be designed for them first. I don't know if you guys...
So I know that you were also referring more to the drivers, the behavior of the driver and not just the pedestrian. And I think because it's a shared pedestrian, but like just to add to Sky's point, it's a shared responsibility, and that just doesn't mean that it's the pedestrian or the driver that are involved in the crash, but also us as designers. And it has to be a multi-tiered approach. We have to understand that there's design that can self-enforce certain things, then there is enforcement where, and then of course there's education where each user needs to respect the right of the other user. So a driver needs to respect the right of the pedestrian, and pedestrian needs to respect the rights. So I would say that it's all these things combined, but we cannot tackle it just by one thing itself. There has to be a multiple and multi-sectoral approach.
Eu concordo, concordo. Eu acho que tem essa questão de olhar, quer dizer, os exemplos ali que eu mostrei das travessias, em qualquer caso de atropelamento, o que ia para o registro é o pedestre não atravessou na faixa. Isso é a base de informação. Então, o que acontece? Aí a gente vai para um nível um pouco mais além, que é quem está lá na ponta coletando essa informação. Muitas vezes, a não ser que seja um problema grave de infraestrutura, do tipo um semáforo que não está funcionando, uma cratera na via, essa pessoa ela não tem o olhar treinado para identificar problemas de infraestrutura que muitas vezes não são problemas nítidos, mas são oportunidades de melhoria, que foi o caso que eu mostrei ali daquela faixa de travessia deslocada. Quer dizer, a faixa de travessia ela estava lá e o pedestre não usou, mas ela não está atendendo a linha de desejo. E isso acaba não indo para o registro, porque aquela pessoa lá na ponta ela não tem esse olhar treinado para identificar essas coisas. Então, sempre que eu olho, assim, quando a gente olhar para fatores contribuintes e a gente vê essa questão comportamental, é lógico que tem uma série de comportamentos que claramente são escolha do usuário, como, por exemplo, beber e dirigir. É uma coisa que é claro que é do usuário, mas tem comportamentos que acabam entrando como imprudência, que tem total relação com o ambiente, que ele não está desenhado de uma maneira adequada. Então, eu acho que é sempre ficar com essa pulguinha atrás da orelha e sempre olhar esse outro lado. Assim, será que realmente esse ambiente está faltando alguma coisa ali? Tem alguma coisa ali que pode ser melhorada para evitar que esse tipo que novos acidentes desse tipo aconteçam? Exatamente, exatamente. Acho que esse é o ponto. Mais perguntas? Angústias, inquietações? Pode?
Também fiquei com outra dúvida. Quando você mostrou, acho que foi o exemplo seu que você deu, né? Quando você tirou faixas de rolamento para veículos e privilegiou o pedestre com aumento de calçada e transporte público, o que a gente imagina é que esse tráfego ele vai migrar para algum lugar. Né? E aí, de repente, quando você faz o estudo antes e depois daquele lugar, vai reduzir acidente. Mas para onde esse tráfego foi, também seria uma preocupação. Será que os acidentes também não vão migrar?
É uma questão a ser monitorada, com certeza. O que acontece? Muitas vezes, nesse exemplo, e normalmente, quando isso é feito, são áreas de baixa velocidade. Então, ali, nesse caso, era o miolo do centro de Santiago. Então, são quadras curtas, são vias que não têm uma caixa viária muito larga, que permita uma velocidade muito alta. Então, mesmo com desvios de tráfego e rotas alternativas, tem a tendência de que, quer dizer, é uma coisa, talvez não, precisa ser monitorado. E o que acontece? Tem alguns estudos também que nós encontramos, que eu até não trouxe aqui hoje, que mostram que quando tem esse tipo de transformação na via, esse impacto ele reverbera para as vias do entorno, porque passa uma mensagem de que aquela área é diferenciada também. Então, não só a via onde foi feita a intervenção, ela é impactada, como também o entorno. Isso a gente nota muito em vias que são fechadas só para o trânsito de pedestres, né? O que acontece é que as vias do entorno, elas também acabam
sofrem um impacto.
Exato, um acalmamento.
Yes, I agree completely. And what we have to do is take a neighbourhood approach. And so that's why a lot of the key principles include looking at the network. So we identify where the serious hotspots are and the crashes, and we start there. But like we talked about with context, we don't put our blinders on to everything else that's around. We then go and look at what are the alternative routes. How do we reduce the speeds there? How do we make sure we can do physical interventions to improve the safety there as well? And hopefully, ideally, ultimately, we get to the whole city, right? So we start with some priorities, do the areas around, and then get the whole city to be as safe as possible.
Obrigada.
Tenho uma dúvida, posso? É mais curiosidade. Queria saber que vocês poderiam dizer alguma coisa sobre as dificuldades que existem na implantação dessa nova visão, né, que a ACTO tem, se ela encontra, que aqui no Brasil a gente tem muita barreira política, econômica, sobretudo política e ideológica. Se ela encontra essa dificuldade, encontra aqui e nos outros países, como na Índia, por exemplo, de implantação dessa nova filosofia, dessa visão pró-pedestre e menos veículos.
They are everywhere. There are always many challenges. We know that everything we're showing you here today, it's not easy, but we know it's so important that we just have to find the different strategies to move through to implement these. Now, I won't lie to you, having political will at the highest level helps a lot. It's great, and it certainly helps to move quickly and to be effective and to scale things up very quickly. But that's not to say if you don't have that things can't change. And what we find is actually working very closely with the community and with practitioners and collecting more metrics and doing more sessions and trainings and capacity building, we can build a movement from within the city and from within the communities to demand for these types of changes. Now, ultimately, politicians want votes. So if you have a community demanding for certain things, it'll take a while, but then the politicians will eventually listen. If this is what they want, this is how I have to deliver, and I have to promise on this because this is how I get elected, right? So we need to work simultaneously from top down and from bottom up at the same time. The other key thing is using some of the strategies that we talked about that don't have to cost a lot of money to implement interim projects. And the key there is to finding where the communities want that, right? It's finding the weak point or the strong point, I guess if I say, in the system where you're not going to get a lot of backlash, right? So it doesn't make sense to go in and say, right, we're going to transform these 3 intersections on this main corridor if everyone on that street says, no, go away, we don't want it, get out of town, we hate it. It's going to be a very big battle. So where a city, you have to start as a city, is look to your advocacy community, look to where people are asking for these types of changes, and start there. Collect the metrics of the before and after, and use that as a catalyst to scale up and to show, listen, look, here it works. Speeds are lower. Children are safer. We're doing the counts, we're measuring the speed, and we're doing qualitative surveys that show that this is important. That allows you to do 2 things. It allows you to take that same strategy as a success story to other parts of the city and other neighborhoods, but it also hopefully allows you to build community and political support to go back and take that paint and pour the concrete to make it permanent. And the final thing I'll just mention is to work with your media. The media has a very big role and can play a very big opposition role to these types of changes. And as part of the Bloomberg program, we're working with them a lot, with the communication experts, and Carla, who's here, busy off doing this at the moment, to help the media understand the story and the narrative and the numbers behind these types of moves, that we're saving lives. We're not doing this just to annoy someone. We're not doing these moves because we're bored and we've got nothing else to do, right? We're fighting for them because we know that they're right, and we need the media and communications to help to tell that story along the way.
I'm just going to add to that. So Sky said top down and ground up. I want to say that it's also middle level, and that's all of us in this room. Oftentimes what it takes is us as designers, engineers, planners, architects to stand up and say, no, we want to do things differently. So I would say that sometimes the challenge is we ourselves are our biggest challenge. We don't believe that we have enough resources, or we don't believe that we'll have enough support, or we believe that no one's going to listen to us when we advocate for these changes. So one of the things that I would say is that it's the biggest challenge sometimes in a process is us and our thinking ourselves. So if we can change that, and if we ourselves decide every day that at least one small thing, whether it is that pedestrian crossing that will be aligned with the clear path in my design, or whether it's an accessibility ramp that I will fight for, if we can start making those smallest changes, I think that trend of prioritizing pedestrians, it's a long way to go, but I think we can start there. So as a collective effort, I think at the middle level, there's a lot that we can achieve.
One more thing I'll explain. So do you remember the cover of the book? Before the blue book, there was a green book that I showed, the Urban Street Design Guide. So in the US, as I explained, the national codes, we're going to take a very long time to change, I think, in any country, right? To change national policy, very long time. And by creating that green book with practitioners from around the city, so they participated in the best practices, publishing that set of guidelines and then having the endorsement campaign with it meant that when the mayor of a city or the transportation commissioner of a city signed a letter to say, yes, we believe in these principles of design and how we should design our urban streets, it acted like a permission slip for practitioners everywhere. So what happens when you're sitting in a meeting and a drawing of a street design comes in front of you? As a practitioner, I now have the confidence, I have the permission to bring out that set of guidance and say, listen, our mayor has told us, or our transportation commissioner has committed to this approach to how we design our streets. So look, here's what we should be doing. And at that meeting, if one person doesn't, all it takes sometimes, we might sit there and think it, and then you get embarrassed, and then you think, oh, am I the only one? Nobody else is thinking this. And then nobody says anything. And then the drawing gets stamped, and it gets approved, and it gets built, and then we're in trouble because it's there for decades. Sometimes all it takes is one person at a meeting saying, hey guys, we've learned some new stuff, maybe we've got some new challenges, shouldn't we think about it like this? And then you build another ally and someone can say, yeah, I agree, maybe we should. And shifting that conversation, as Ankita said, at the practitioner level, and by bringing a permission slip to the table. Now you guys have a lot of complicated politics in São Paulo, like every other city. But at the moment, the city of São Paulo has endorsed the Global Street Design Guide. So you have the permission to pull that out at a meeting and say, our leaders politically in this administration have said and put their name towards this approach. The PDF of the letter is on the website. So if you ever need that, that's our goal, is that we can help give you guys tools and resources to bring it out and shift the conversation. Café?
Vamos fazer uma pausa de 10 minutos para o café. Tem pão de queijo quentinho, tem 2 pães de queijos por saquinho para eles ficarem quentes, mas daí vocês se arranjam lá. E a gente volta em 10, 15 minutos. Enquanto isso, a gente vai organizar a sala para a próxima atividade. A próxima atividade é bem interativa, animada, então bem diferente do que foi essa primeira parte da oficina. Então fiquem que vão ter peças para vocês mexerem e a gente continuar essa discussão, continuar conversando.